Thank you, Governor, for speaking to ET Now in your first interaction after the last monetary policy, which is the last monetary policy statement for this fiscal. Mervyn King, the former governor of the Bank of England, he said the best monetary policy is the most boring monetary policy. So by that criterion, I think yesterday's policy really made the mark, because it's kind of policy where everybody says, well, no surprises, ho-hum, and go back to their business. But do you think the day after, when you look back at it, do you think that you lost an opportunity to speak on certain specifics, like about the kind of regulatory comfort for capital, treatment of discoms, the kind of specific instruments that you do for liquidity support? Could we have a little bit more specific on those in yesterday's policy?
Okay, I think we have to be specific on the specifics. I think broadly we sent the message on where we were on the monetary policy path, and I think everybody understood what we were saying. I think that was pretty clear, so I don't think that was a missed opportunity. I think on other issues, it really depends on what people think the problem is.
Okay.
On liquidity, there seems to be a sense that rates are going up, and it must be a liquidity issue, so somehow the RBI has to fix that. We have continuously sort of stated what our liquidity position is, and of course we've made a lot of changes in the liquidity framework, and we continue to review them. And as I said yesterday, we'll continue to review this. In fact, I've called in market participants to understand what it is that they're so worried about on liquidity, because there seems to be a sense that something more needs to be done. Of course, as there is need for infusing long-term liquidity, we use the appropriate instruments, which include open market operations. When there's a need for short-term liquidity, which happens, for example, when government balances build up, we do short-term instruments.
It's just that, Governor, when the system, your RBI has been infusing total, 1,200 to 1,300 billion every day throughout December and January. So clearly there is a systemic shortage of liquidity. I think that really is.
No, but there's
it's not
also
a short-term crunch. It's 2 months is much long.
Well, sometimes depending on what the actions of certain players in the system are, there's a build-up of balances. Now, obviously, people try and offset those. So wherever there is a sense there is permanent liquidity needs that are building up, we act accordingly.
Because 2 months, I think the market players feel is too long a period to justify that kind of reaction.
Well, yesterday the government announced a buyback of 20,000 crores. So clearly, we knew that was going to happen. That was part of the sort of ease on liquidity, because a buyback means money is flowing into the system on a permanent basis.
I'll tell you where the market's worry is. The worry is that Reserve Bank, in its new role of inflation targeter formally, it tends to want to keep liquidity a little tighter than warranted, only to err on the safe side. And in fact, that brings me to my next question, really.
Well, first let me react then. We have no intention of keeping liquidity tighter, and in fact, we have supplied, through various instruments, whatever the market is looking for. In fact, our longer term instruments are not fully subscribed to, even though they are available. Of course, I can understand.
Function of rate. It's a function of the yield at which you're willing to offer. That's also that, no?
Yeah, but absolutely, absolutely. But again, there's a price for liquidity, and if the market is not willing to pay the price, then fine. But the point, I think, again and again, that I want to emphasize is that we don't want to keep it
that's not your intent.
Short. That is not our intent.
In hindsight, entirely with the benefit of hindsight, has the RBI been a little bit behind the curve in cutting rates, just as in the earlier period, it was a little behind the curve in raising rates?
I don't think interest rates are what are holding back the economy today.
Today, no, but maybe about 4 months earlier, 5 months earlier, when sentiment was upbeat, it may have provided that extra kick.
I don't know.
Of course, the benefit
we could always debate it for a long time. Remember, there was a time, people forget this very quickly, there was a time when people said, you're nuts to think that you will bring inflation down below 6. You shouldn't even do this. And you're subjecting the economy to severe stress, don't even think about it. because now all this is in the background, and oh, it was all the oil prices. Remember, the government has kept back 75% of the oil price decline through higher taxes. So it's not all oil prices. Yes, commodities have helped, etc. But of course, government food management has helped. But give some credit where credit is due.
Oh, absolutely.
That inflation has come down. It has come down largely according to the path that the RBI set out.
So in all this, is there some kind of balance that one draws between going after, zealously going after NPAs, punish the promoters by all means, but is there a balance to be drawn where, we don't cut our nose to spite our face? Because the outstanding example that comes to mind to me is Enron, where yes, the promoter got really punished, so much that it disappeared completely, but we have a stranded asset. So do we draw a line somewhere? It's a very difficult line to draw, that we go after the promoters, especially those who are willfully defaulting, but at the same time try and preserve the assets that have been created with public money. So, and economic recovery is part of the answer.
No, so I don't think there is anything in RBI policy which says we should, which is targeting promoters. We absolutely respect the private sector and the risk they've taken, and there are many promoters who, despite their best efforts, are in trouble.
Absolutely.
Bad luck, government policy, bad structure of the project, and we should not in any way reduce risk-taking in this economy. We have precious few risk-takers.
Absolutely.
And we should celebrate, of course, the successful ones, but we should also allow for entrepreneurship to not succeed.
To fail, yes.
And we have, under every time we've talked about this, it is about setting the projects back on track. Now, there is a path, which is the easy path, which is not to take any action, to extend and pretend. The project is not doing well. It needs action on the part of the banks, sometimes to write down the debt, because the debt is too high. The promoter has no incentive under the current structure. Sometimes on the part of the tariff authorities to increase the tariffs that a project has. Sometimes on the part of the state government to give land permission where a road is needed, or on the central authorities for some environmental permission. Whole variety of people have to come together. What happens in the extend and pretend phase is nobody is actually paying attention. The debt is growing, cost overruns are tremendous, but nothing is being done to start the project. It is bad for the economy for that in that situation.
Sure.
But the banks don't want to push at that point because it requires recognizing that this is actually an NPA, taking the hit, and then saying what can we do under the existing structure to recover as much as we can. What we're trying to do is move from the extend and pretend phase to the recognize, put in whatever resources are needed, and move forward. And for the banks, this requires adequate capital. The government has said repeatedly that there will be adequate capital, allows them to absorb the hits where they need to take the hit, but those hits may be in some cases, again this is not across the board, may be necessary. Now you say growth. Yes, of course, growth is the
ultimate answer.
Is always the tide that lifts all the sinking, all the ships. The problem has been we've waited 5 years, 6 years for growth. Remember, all the forbearance started in 2008.
Sure.
We said, bad crisis, let's postpone problem. It was a small problem then. It would have meant small hits on bank balance sheets. Obviously, since then, the problem has grown. More assets have become stressed, etc. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we hope and pray? We had 2 bad monsoons. The world economy is in a bad situation. A number of sectors which are in stress here are in stress in the global economy. How long do you think it will take for steel to come back? Are we going to hope and pray that our economy does so well that eventually steel prices are really high? It will take time.
It will take time.
So the point is, do you extend and pretend while waiting for that to happen, or do you take actual action? And that action is precisely meant to put the projects back on track, not to penalize promoters. That is absolutely not the first, second, third priority. Yes, eventually promoters who have behaved badly
do deserve
in terms of whisking away assets over-invoicing, or essentially holding the banks up, will have to figure out the way forward, and the system will deal with them. But that is not the objective of this exercise. The objective of this exercise is to put assets back on track. When I talk sometimes about promoters behaving badly, I'm talking about a minority of promoters. But I'm also talking about a culture where it is a presumption that the banks take the hit. And on the upside, the promoter takes all the benefit. That is not to the interest of the taxpayers in this country. That is not to the interests of the larger public. But importantly, it's not to the interest of the promoters themselves. To let a few bad apples increase the cost of capital for all of them. When you talk about interest rates, the bulk of interest rates is not the repo rate, but it's what gets added on. It's the 13-14% they're paying, the risk premium, because of bad behavior.
In fact, that brings me to a question that one of our viewers has sent us, Governor. This is Milind Karmekar. He says, is our legal system so weak that public sector banks can't take action against promoters or defaulting companies for their recovery?
They should have enough capital to take the losses. But if you look forward, again, putting the project back on track is going to give them the cash flow. Today the project is not paying. It's sitting there, the road needs to be built. Nobody is getting the permissions, doing the things necessary to get that road built, which is going to make 90% of the capital investment that's already gone in actually start producing. So those kinds of actions need concerted effort on all sides. And what this is impelling is giving banks the incentive to say, okay, we have the capital backing us, now we can take action on this and move it forward. Decide what to do going forward. Maybe this promoter can work out. Maybe we need to get somebody else in. Maybe the state authorities will cooperate once.
And the legal system also?
So legal system is a different issue. A lot of this is being done in the shadow of the legal system. Now, if we had a strong bankruptcy code, you could do a lot of out-of-court negotiation, knowing that that was a backup in case things didn't work out. This is how a lot of other countries work.
Because in India, you know that the ultimate refuge is the judiciary. You go to court and get stuck for centuries.
Exactly. So that is the real problem, that we have draconian laws, but the courts interpret those laws as allowing them, even though some of the laws say the courts cannot intervene. They allow themselves to intervene in those situations. The Supreme Court even has opined on this process. The point is that for the promoter who wants to hold things up, it can get held up for a long time, which is why the instruments we've created, like the SDR, are attempts to get around this. Now the point is we have to use them well, and we are currently monitoring the process to make sure they are used well. So you do an SDR. They typically do it when you want to, when you don't have confidence in the promoter. If you don't have confidence in the promoter and you do the SDR, you don't want to let the promoter stay in control. Or you want to at least have some control over the promoter. So we need to make sure that that happens.
So you've done this exercise, Governor, with all the banks at one particular specific period of time. So how are you now able to quantify the amount of NPAs in the system, even in terms of percentage? And there's also this issue that you had the Supreme Court saying, upholding the ruling of the CIC, saying the Reserve Bank should be more transparent, should give out the names of defaulting borrowers. So is there a case of greater transparency?
Well, let me first on that last point. The reason we didn't give those out is precisely because of previous court rulings, which said you cannot publish the names of defaulters, etc., which are protecting them. No, previous rulings by courts.
That's true, sir.
And our point was we were looking for legal certainty. We have no problem revealing the names of defaulters if the legal system allows us.
Sure, but this is the Supreme Court of the country.
No, absolutely. So now there's a ruling. We have no problem doing it.
So will you be coming out with these names? Because I understand that the Reserve Bank is thinking of filing a petition before a larger bench.
Look, there are different issues involved and people conflate these issues, I think, to the detriment of the larger good. There is a sort of almost an accusation that we are hiding defaulters or protecting them. We have absolutely no interest in doing that. In fact, I mean, to some extent, provided sort of honest, genuine defaulters who are defaulting because of problems rather than willful, are, you know, their privacy is protected and they're not displayed everywhere, which will kill risk-taking in this country. We should be very happy talking about guys who've built the system.
Absolutely.
So we have no problem with that, but there were previous rulings and some uncertainty about the rights of those people, and the Supreme Court has been very strong on privacy rights also. So there was clarity needed. The Supreme Court has come out with a certain
So now
view.
will you be making those names public?
To the extent there is a public case, we will not stand in the way of those issues. There's a different issue about the inspection reports of banks. There's a lot in inspection reports which are shared with us because we are the regulator, which can cause a certain amount of anxiety in the public, right? And to put those numbers out, to put the data out in an indiscriminate basis may cause panic in the system in certain cases. I'm not saying in all cases, but I can visualize circumstances.
Not individual accounts, Governor, but the NPA system as a whole, total in this.
With that we make clear on a regular basis. When you're projecting out, projections always have assumptions. You have to be very careful that people understand what those assumptions are. Your assumption, for example, that you start with is with growth, there will be a tremendous reduction in NPAs.
But with that caveat,
does it make sense now to say under this scenario it is this percent? You have to map things out. We have mapped it out. We have a good sense.
So the reason why I tell you why you might, you know, the view is that you must be having a number in mind, because you spoke about capital. When you tell the government what kind of capital support banks require, which you necessarily will have to because they're in the middle of the budget exercise, so there must be some number that you suggest to them.
Absolutely, we have numbers.
Yeah, so that number.
We have done various scenarios.
So could it be shared?
It is a moving target. It is a moving target because the banks are working with the promoter. And you say, what effect would this have? There are promoters who actually sold assets, saying, I don't want to be classified as an NPA. I'm selling these assets in order to come good. So this whole thing is having some beneficial effects, is putting pressure on the system to clean up and to do the right thing. So in that situation, I think it would be best for the system if we essentially mapped out the whole issue, shared the data with the government, and continued monitoring the process. And I think that's exactly what we're doing. We are confident that there is enough capital in the system based on what the government has promised and based on our own capabilities, regulatory
capabilities. And you don't think that with this kind of pro-cyclical action of yours, it means the government has to put more capital than required, and that money could be used for a better way in the country, because after all the government has scarce resources. Do you want to beef up the capital of banks or bridges, roads,
I think there
hospitals?
is absolutely no better use of capital today than to ensure the banks are seen as healthy and can lend to the economy. Where are you going to get lending? I mean, forget this exercise. Public sector bank lending was falling even before this. Primarily because banks are spending more time dealing with distressed assets on a day-to-day basis.
Not because the RBI was putting pressure on them to go after. They didn't have time for lending because, that was not in some way eating into their capital.
You think the banks themselves, regardless of what the RBI says, see, don't try and make this NPA issue an RBI problem. The NPAs exist.
Regardless of who is responsible.
The issue is how to clean it up.
Absolutely.
Right? So that is really the issue. And the one view is the benign forbearance, things will happen, let's stick our head into the sand and hope and pray this happens. We've done that for 6 years. Nothing has really happened to ameliorate it, and to some extent, relative to 2008, we are in a worse position.
One of our viewers, another gentleman, I think his name is Gagandeep Singh, he says your term ends in September. a lot of work has been done, but so much remains undone. Would you be open to a second term? I think this is something that a lot of our viewers would like to know. I know you're going to tell me that's a hypothetical question, but can I have a hypothetical answer to a hypothetical question?
No, one never gives a hypothetical answer to a hypothetical question.
Okay, but then let me ask you that you had a long wish list when you came, a long laundry list. How much of that have you been able to really, success have you really had in completing that? Or are they all works in progress, in which case is 3 years too short a term for any governor, even somebody who's so committed and so zealous as you? Is it too short a term?
No, look, I think off the list, I mean, we've certainly started on everything that I said on the first day I took office. Nothing is ever really completed. I mean, we said we'd bring in new banks.
No full stops in India, right?
There are no full stops. There's no full stops in policy.
That's true.
It continues. But I will also say there's a saying which always I remember: the cemetery is full of indispensable people. So nobody is really indispensable in the system.
Sure.
What is important is that you create the institutional momentum, that whatever is started continues along that path.
When you speak of relations between the government and the RBI, it has been the strength, institutional strength, and certainly relations have been far better between the government and the RBI now than earlier. And despite the fact that you were appointed by one government and have worked largely with another, but there are still some issues, I think, like the composition of the MPC, the composition
settled.
of...
MPC
But
settled.
we've not had anything public, no public announcement.
The government has to place it before Parliament.
Okay.
It has to choose its
and
time.
The fiscal deficit also, there do seem to be some nuances in the view.
There are plenty of...
The central board composition of the Reserve Bank of India itself.
Okay.
So are there
No. Actually, I don't want to say, there never will be frictions.
It's good. Healthy friction is always good.
It is, as you said, there are places where friction is healthy. We make our views on the fiscal known to the government. The government has plenty of people within the government who think the way we think. The government is not one person or one monolith. There are plenty of views within the government. And ultimately the government has to balance various constituencies and take a decision. So
they have a more difficult job perhaps than you.
Much more. In our statement yesterday, we hesitated. In fact, we refrained from saying this is what you should do.
Absolutely.
The government will do what it has to do.
Sure.
We are just a small part of the whole picture, and we are saying it will be helpful for us if you do this, but you have to take the overall picture.
But despite that, Governor, you've said it, that you don't, stick your neck out and tell the government, but you have actually spoken on a number of issues that, former central bank governors in India and central bank governors across the world have not spoken about, whether it's about, intolerance, whether make in India. Also, I think there was something about, what else did you have about something about the lifestyle maybe of corporates, etc. So I mean, this is all. I mean, we're all entirely with you in this. But then, do you see yourself maybe as an activist governor?
No, I don't see myself as an activist governor. I speak out wearing a slightly broader hat than governor. I'm also an economist.
Okay.
And sometimes I use my economist view of the broader agenda, just to give a sense of, the Make in India for India was not against Make in India, though it was portrayed in the press as such. It was a nuance on the broader Make in India philosophy. It was saying we probably over the next few years need to make for India. And I'm told Mr. Modi in his speech the other day, Startup India, made some references to make for India.
Sure.
And I think it's not in opposition to make in India.
No, certainly not. It's just that
people sort of interpreted, I mean, how you're making in India, but you're going to make for somebody.
One last question, Governor, before I end. You had once said, I think, that as a student, it was your ambition to become Reserve Bank of India Governor. And now that you have become Reserve Bank of India Governor, and at a very young age, I think you were second youngest to get that. Third. Okay, third. You correct me on that.
No, why? Because C.D. Deshmukh.
C.D. Deshmukh, yes, lecture you just gave. Yes. Who was Manmohan Singh? Dr. Manmohan Singh, I think?
C.D. Deshmukh was the youngest. Dr. Manmohan Singh was certainly younger than I was by a few months.
Few months,
But, these are...
what I wanted to ask you is there any other ambition that you're harboring which you haven't told us about, and can you share it with your ET viewers?
I just want to spend more time with the family and write.
You're much too early, Doctor, to write your
memoirs.
memoirs.
I will write, not memoirs.
No,
I still think I have
yes,
some good
a lot,
economic thinking left in me, so I will
And
write.
why not in the service of the nation?
No, well, I mean, I will do what the nation demands of me, but I think I do want to go back to write and think.
Okay, so we are just hoping that if the government does ask you that hypothetical question, you will give them a more specific than a hypothetical answer, and it will be yes. Thank you so much, Kamala. It's been great speaking with you.
Thank you.